Hi there, I'm Jen, this is Remembered Reads, and this is going to be the We Ain't Getting Any Younger book tag. This tag was created by Una from the Codex Cantina in celebration or mockery of Krypto from the Codex Cantina's 40th birthday. I was tagged by them as well, so let's go through this. I suppose in an ideal world I would have done this on the day and then be saying happy birthday, but we'll just say happy belated birthday. Question number 1. While it's proven that too many birthdays can kill you, the amount of cake we can eat is still under debate. Name the most recent book that gave you a sugar or book high. Experimenting in how much cake one could eat. Could be a fun experiment. I don't really know what a book high is supposed to be, but in terms of just being completely both entertained and impressed, Thomas King's poetry collection, 77 Fragments of a Familiar Ruin, definitely did that for me. I said this in the wrap-up where I talked about that poetry collection. It managed to be both really humorous and very serious in terms of the issues it was dealing with simultaneously, which I think can be difficult to do, but was incredibly successful in doing so. So yeah, I'm gonna go with that. Question number 2 is, sometimes we get older and wider instead of older and wiser. Name the longest book that you've ever read. My favorite joke about this is to take length to not mean page count, but to mean literal length. And in that case, the longest book that I've ever read is Joe Sacco's The Great War. Joe Sacco is generally a comics journalist, but this was essentially a single panel of one of the battles at the Somme. And it's several meters long. It's one of the books that I have in storage, but I think I had video of it in an old tag from a few years ago, so if I can find that footage and pull it, I will be inserting it here so you can see it. But it's a massively long book in terms of length, in terms of meters, in terms of actual distance, not in terms of page count. Number 3. Is the best part of pictures is there always a younger version of you. Name a book that you enjoyed more the first time you read it than the second. When I was, I think, 11 or 12 years old, I started reading Nancy Springer's Book of Isle series, which was kind of my first foray into fantasy by anyone other than Tolkien. And at the time I loved it. The Silver Sun was a book that, again, this is in storage so I can't show it to you, but my original copy of it is completely abused. It's falling apart because I read and reread it so many times between the ages of like 11 and 13. And when I was in university, I had an incredibly long commute. I reread that whole series and it was not particularly outstanding or memorable. I think with a lot of genre fiction like that, the first thing that you read, especially when you're young, is just more impressive because you've never seen that set of tropes or cliches or whatever framework the genre plays with. And so it all seems really new and fresh. You just haven't seen other examples of it because you're 11 and it's the first one you've read. But at the same time, I do think that that had a big impact on a lot of my teenage reading afterwards. But yeah, it wasn't memorable when I reread it, which was too bad. Although I didn't dislike them, so it wasn't all bad. Number 4. As you get older, you must learn to never skip a bathroom break before jumping in a car ride. Name a book you read in very few sittings. And the second part of this question is, have you ever walked to the bathroom holding a book and then blindly fumbled for the door handle? No, I haven't. I did once drop a book on the floor of not exactly a public toilet, but in like a hospital toilet. But I wasn't reading it, it slipped and fell and got wet. I was in the middle of rereading The Innkeeper's Song, which is actually a favorite book of mine, but yeah, I had to buy a different copy after that because do you want to hang on to something that's come back from the floor of a hospital toilet moist? You do not. Anyway, that wasn't the real question. The real question is a book that you read in very few sittings. Almost everything that I read in very few sittings just because most of my reading, aside from right now at this odd moment in time that we're living in, is not sitting at home cozy in a chair reading. Most of my reading has been either on fairly long commutes. As I said in the earlier question, when I was in university, I had a commute that was regularly 3 hours a day and often 4 hours a day because it was an hour and a half each way, and with buses and subways getting delayed in winter, sometimes significantly longer. When I was in grad school, I had a commute that was about an hour. In my first job, I had a commute that was about an hour on the train. So during those years, I regularly had 2 to 4 hours a day of just non-stop reading in blocks. So I often got through a book in one day just sitting on the transit in that day. And then for several years, I was living in a climate where it was incredibly hot during the summer and you can't do outdoor exercise. So when I was living in Houston, for example, I did a lot of reading at the gym because I wouldn't want to go out on a bike when it was, 40 degrees, whatever that is, 103. So I'd go ride a stationary bike at the gym and read for 90 minutes. And in 90 minutes, depending on what you're reading, you can get through quite a bit. So almost all of my reading is in one sitting. And I mean, lately I've been reading a lot of poetry, which again, one sitting. Question number 5 is, don't let old age get you down, because it's harder to get you back up these days. Name a book you had to put down and why. Well, I frequently accidentally put down books in that I will start reading something on a tablet or my phone or Kindle or something and forget that I'm reading it. And because they're library books, they then return themselves. So I will suddenly remember, oh yeah, wasn't I reading said book? And it will be expired and I won't be able to read it. So that does happen to me quite frequently, but it's usually something where if I actually was reading a physical book, I would have the physical reminder that I was reading it, and I would get the warning email that if it was a physical book from the library that I needed to take it back, and then I'd, have that 3 days where I could rush to read it. And also physical books you can renew if there isn't a waiting list for them. So yeah, a lot of ebooks. Question number 6 is, age isn't how long you've been alive, it's how many lives you've lived. What book genres have you been wanting to try outside of your comfort zone? I always say that I don't really have a comfort zone because I will read everything. Although I think the thing that I have the most difficulty reading and enjoying and not nitpicking is always genre romance. I tend to nitpick them in sometimes a way that's not completely fair because that is such a strict genre product. But I do read other strict genre products like mysteries, and I'm not as critical there. So what I'd like to do is not necessarily read more of it, but read the same amount and try to figure out why I'm being unfairly critical of a genre that's not meant to really transcend itself regularly, because that's kind of an unfair judgment that I'm making. Because as I said, I wouldn't judge other strict genre products that in the same way. Question number 7 is, life gets worse the older you get. Luckily you don't have much left. Krypto is slightly younger than I am, so I'm not sure how I should take that one. Anyway, name a book that slowly turned sour for you but you finished anyways. Were you glad you stuck it out? I read a really weird, fairly short book. I was going to say I think I have it, but no, I donated it the last time I donated a box of books. And it was called How to Talk About Places You've Never Been. And it was basically a sequel. The author had previously written How to Talk About Books You've Never Read, which I think is kind of an interesting concept in that I think you should know about things even if you haven't been to the place or read the actual book. I think it's good to have extra context. So I was expecting more of that kind of thing. Or else something funny in terms of misleading your friends, one or the other. And it wasn't either of them. It was a kind of middle of the road, not very interesting thing. And I thought, what's the point of this? But it was short, so I did read the whole thing. Number 8 is, peer pressure seems to decrease as you get older. Where did all of your friends go? Name a book that you checked out because of peer pressure, and were you happy to have tried it? 2 years ago, I think, one of my good friends in Houston and I exchanged favorite books. I gave her my favorite book of the year before, which was Tracy Lindbergh's Birdie, which she kept for a year or so. I had moved and everything, and when she came up here to visit, she brought the book back with me and was like, I'm never finishing this. She did not enjoy it. But she lent me her favorite, which was called Embers. I don't remember the author's name, but it was a Hungarian novel from the 40s that had been translated more recently. And when I read it, and I did complete it, I was kind of baffled by why my friend was so fond of it. She ended up saying it was because of the very bleak tone of it and not anything else, which is interesting. And having read it, I thought, okay, it was interesting kind of the history of why this wasn't translated into English for such a long time and why it finally was. It was kind of interesting in the sense of finding out what my friend got out of this book that's a favorite of hers, but I didn't particularly enjoy it, to be honest. It was about retired military officers and lovers that they may or may not have had and letters that they end up burning and not reading, so there are no answers. But it wasn't in a style that I would kind of come for. Something like that I enjoy reading if it's very kind of histographic metafiction where somebody's talking outside and you jump back and forth in time more. And this wasn't really like that. There were 3 distinct sections to it, but it didn't jump around in the way that would make that type of story interesting for me. I would rather have some structural weirdness going on, I think. But anyway, yes, I was happy I tried it. And we're supposed to tag people. Una tagged a pile of people, and I know a few channels that I watch aren't doing tags right now, so I don't really know who to tag. But if you're watching this and you would like to do this tag because you are younger and you want to feel smug, or you are older and you want to raise an eyebrow and say, hey now, consider yourself tagged. Anyway, happy belated birthday to Krypto, and that's it for now. Ciao.